I lived in this old house my entire life. My great-grandfather built it here on a large farm in Alabama long before I was born. My grandfather had helped expand upon it long before I was born. So to me, it's always been the way that it is now, a two-story house built on a brick foundation. We have a basement bunker, and in my years living here, it comes in handy many times. Tornadoes aren't uncommon in this part of Alabama. Luckily, the house never got damaged in any of them, but the comfort of the bunker always made them less scary. That isn't what I'm here to talk about, though. I'm here to tell you about the iron door within the bunker. It's been there as long as I can remember. I've seen it a million times, but the first time that my attention was called to it, I was 14. It was the beginning of tornado season, early March, and my parents, two sisters, and my grandparents had all entered the bunker for safety. It was then that I noticed the door for the first time. It was solid iron, and it looked almost like a bank vault with an enormous handle in place of these spinning wheel handles that you would imagine on a vault. It had a lock in the middle and a deadbolt attached to it as well. At the time, I was too entrapped by the fear of the weather outside to ask any questions then. By the time that it was over, I had already forgotten all about the door. My second encounter with the door was not long after, though, only following the first by about 3 weeks. This time, however, when I saw it, I immediately questioned my mother about it. She brushed off my query with a brief response. Something along the lines of, "Oh, it doesn't matter, or I'll tell you later." It wasn't until the end of that year's season that I questioned the door again. I asked, "Mum, what's that door go to?" She brushed me off yet again, though this time told me to ask my grandfather about it. I would have asked him had I remembered when we had left the bunker. Not until the next season did I remember the door again. After the first tornado of the season, the door as a mystery was reborn in my mind. This time, though, I remembered to ask my grandfather, "Papa, what's that door in the bunker lead to?" His face shifted from his ever-joyful expression. What replaced it wasn't an angry one, but one of fear in grave seriousness. "Don't you ever open that door, son," he said, his expression unchanging. I asked him, "Why? What's behind it?" He quickly replied, "That doesn't matter, just don't ever open it." Something in his tone shook me to my core. My grandfather wasn't a very serious person. He had served in the army for a time, and I think he saw some pretty real stuff. After he left the army, that's when he met my grandmother, and she moved into the house with him and his parents then. From what I understand, before coming back from service, he was less humorous all the time. However, afterwards, he was a jolly and joking man. It seemed backwards, but it isn't the weirdest coping mechanism that I've heard of. Still, seeing the urgency in his face scared me, and I dropped my interest in that door for the time. I ignored it for another good while before allowing myself to ponder it. By the time the door had found its way into my mind again, my grandfather had passed, and my older sister had moved away. My 19th birthday was just around the corner, and since my grandfather died, my grandmother couldn't bear to sleep in their same room, so I had inherited the old room. My new room was directly adjacent to the stairs down to the bunker. It wasn't until the few nights after I had moved all my stuff in that I noticed it. A faint whimpering noise coming from the bunker. When I went to investigate, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That's when my first notion to scope out the door on my own hit me. I know it sounds ridiculous that I made it 19 years without ever actually looking into the door on my own. Until then, I had only asked my family, and each and every time I got the same response. "Don't open it. It doesn't matter." Now, though I took the matter into my own hands, I brought my head to the door, hoping that it wasn't too thick for the noise to be amplified by pressing my ear to it. What I heard was something between a baby's cry and a dog's whimper. I stayed with my ear to the door for another minute or so before knocking on the door. When I did, the cry swiftly turned from a sound of pain or fear into a muffled shriek of pure anger. A hatred so unadulterated that it sent a violent chill on my spine. I stood straight up and immediately sprinted out of the bunker and up the stairs. I looked to the clock in the hall linking the bunker to my room in the kitchen. To my shock, it read 2:37 a.m. I had been by that bunker for next to an hour. Now I know I'm not the best at keeping track of time, but that didn't explain how what felt like 5 minutes had turned into 50. For a while after that, I didn't hear anything at night, I don't know if it was because whatever it was that was in there had stopped, or if my mind had blacked out. Nonetheless, I didn't notice any noise for some time. One night, just before New Year's, I heard the thing yet again. This time it seemed as if it were howling in pain. I didn't notice it at first, but the muffled banging soon caught my attention. The memory of what I had heard weeks prior rang through my head, and with it, the very same fear that I had experienced alongside the noise. Though I was undoubtedly more scared than I had ever been before in my life, my nature got the better of me. I looked at the same clock. This time it read 2:15 a.m. From the hall I crept down the stairs and slowly opened the door into the bunker yet again. This time, when I rested my ear on the other door, I could feel the vibrations against my head. It was obvious that whatever was making that noise was in excruciating pain. I dared not know the door again in fear that its screams would wake my parents. Instead, I left the room, closed the door to the bunker, and I went back to my room. I closed my door and popped my headphones in, drowning out the noise that faintly emanated from the bunker. After that, the thing made itself known each and every night around 1:30 a.m. I drowned it out in one way or another, but I still desired to know what was down there. For a time, I stayed aware of the thing, but neglected my need to investigate. It wasn't until I brought my girlfriend over that I paid genuine attention to the noise again. My family had gone out of town, and I thought it would be a good chance to spend a night with my amazing girlfriend. We had been together just over a year at the time, and I was already anxious to marry her. She had come over, and we had spent the day doing what we normally do, watching movies, eating way too much, and giggling with each other over the smallest things. Sure enough, before we knew it, 2 a.m. had rolled around the corner and the thing started up again. It took a while for her to notice, but she eventually did. "Babe, what's that noise?" I remember her asking me. I scrambled for words to explain what had been going on. "Okay, you're going to think that I'm crazy," I told her, hoping she would leave it alone, but knowing that would not be the case. She insisted, and I tried to explain it in the best way that I knew how to. To my surprise, she believed exactly what I had told her. However, she wanted to go and knock on the door to hear it for herself. I was hesitant, but I said okay, and showed her down into the bunker into the door. We both pressed our ears against it. The thing wasn't too upset at the time. In fact, it almost seemed as if it were exclaiming with joyous laughter. I had not heard it doing this before, and it deepened my curiosity. My girlfriend looked at me and asked in a low whisper if she could knock on the door. I reluctantly agreed, and she lightly knocked on the door. The noise from within stopped, and we both raised an eyebrow in anticipation of a new reaction from the thing. Nothing ever came, though, and after what felt like 20 minutes, we went back upstairs. When we entered my room, I began to wonder what time it was. I looked at my phone, and it was 3:47 in the morning. It seemed impossible that we had been in that room for almost 45 minutes. When I pointed it out to her, my girlfriend was just as confused as I was. We tried to forget it and went about our night like we normally do, but it ate away at my mind once more. I spent the next few years performing the same ritual every few weeks, going downstairs, listening at the door, and on occasion knocking at it. It wasn't until a week ago that I gained a new lead to help understand the door. Me and my girlfriend, who is now my fiancée, were helping my parents and my younger sister clean out the attic. My grandmother had passed away just before my 22nd birthday, and it left us with a lot of things to sort through in our family home. The attic was one of the last things that we went through, but it yielded the most interesting finds. My mum found a box labelled Papa's Things. She called me and my sister over to look through the box for anything we would like to keep. In the box, there were assorted random items ranging from a handmade pocket knife to letters and bills, but there was one item that I was immediately drawn to. The moleskin journal was worn, seeming as if it had spent many years in use and likely spent even longer in storage. The build-up of dust covering the book made that obvious. For the time, I tucked it under the back pocket of my jeans. We finished going through the attic and ate dinner all together as a family for the first time since Ma had passed. It was nice, but the thought that the journal might answer my lifelong question bored deep into me. My fiancée even noted my absent-mindedness. "Aren't you in there?" she said to me with a feigned smile. "Yeah," I said, "just got some stuff on my mind." And she left it at that, likely thinking my distance was due to the loss that I was experiencing. My mind, however, couldn't have been further from grief. I was nearly shaking in anticipation to find some answer within the journal. I was sure to tell her, but at the time I wasn't even sure the journal would hold anything pertaining to the door. That night, I read through the journal as soon as my wife was there, laid sleeping next to me. My grandfather wrote of his time in the army during World War II. As I'd expected, he had seen some horrors that no man should. I'll spare you from going into detail, but after perusing the writings of what should have been a truly broken man, I realized why he always tried to jest. After he got back, he wrote about the time he spent with my great-grandfather expanding on the house and the farm surrounding it. That was when the bunker was built, and with it, the iron door. While my grandfather worked on the bunker, his father cleared forest to make room for more livestock. Just less than a week into the renovations, my grandfather wrote about his dad approaching him about making a small room apart from the bunker. When he asked why, my grandfather's response was brief. "Just do it," the journal described him saying gravely. "Why, though? What's going on?" My grandfather beckoned. I said, "Just do it." This time in a yell that was written down as the most scared I had ever seen my father. Needless to say, he carried out his dad's request, and in a few months' time, the bunker and the room within it were completed. The journal described how my grandfather had a team of men from the local foundry bring the door in and put it on a giant frame, leaving it open. Again. My grandfather then wrote about the nights that followed the placement of the door. Night 1. At around 12 in the morning, I heard my father's grunts and his heavy footsteps on the first floor below me. The noise was shortly followed by a skittering noise, accompanied by vile cries. They made their way to the stairs to the bunker, when they looped back and out the door. Night 2. Again, at the same time, I heard the same set of noises, however. This time they took a different path through the house. And when they reached the stairs, I heard a loud slam, and my father cried out in pain. I don't know what's going on down there, but I've seen enough in my life not to stick my head out into something fear-retching. Night 3. Tonight, when I heard the stirring on the first floor, I nearly didn't react. But then something new happened. They reached the stairs yet again, however. This time I heard my father shout, "Get back down there!" And then I heard him loudly grunting. I can only assume that he kicked whatever beast down the stairs to the bunker. I heard it tumbling down the stairs and let out a shrill shriek. My grandfather seemed to hurry down the stairs after it. "Go! Go! Get on it there!" he said in his thick southern accent, and then the shot rang out. I was sure of this noise. It was his shotgun that he had probably hunted with for as long as I can remember. The creature howled in pain, and I heard the door creak and slam shut. I don't know what that thing is, but I have no intentions of finding out. Seeing as how it took a shot from my dad's Remington and only got angrier, I knew that I had no place of disturbing it. Plus, the door seemed to hold out. In my hyperactive focus, I made my way through all of what was written in the journal. There wasn't anything more about the door aside from simply noting its existence whenever he wrote about taking shelter in the bunker. At the end of what was written, there was, however, a page with 2 keys marking it. On the page it said, "My dad gave these keys to me right before he passed away. I know exactly what they unlock. However, I don't know why he wouldn't just throw them where not even God could find them. I won't be using them. I have no desire to find out what dwells in the room that he had me construct. I have my second grandchild on the way now, and I'm certain whatever lies beyond that door would put my family in great jeopardy. However, my sense of curiosity won't just let me toss the keys away, so I'll leave them here, and with them I'll put this journal to rest. I've spent the last week mulling it over in my head. Every logical sense I have tells me to stay far away from that door. I could leave the keys in the journal and tuck it away somewhere nice. I'm just too curious for my own good. And to be honest, from the second that I saw the keys, I knew that I was going to open up that door after all this time. But here I am laying in bed writing this. I'm writing this so that there's a full account of what went on before I opened this can of worms. I've managed to get everybody away from the house for the weekend. I even got them to believe that I got sick before we left and stayed home. Soon I'll go down the stairs, and with the same shotgun that my great-grandfather used, I'll open the door against my better judgment. If I come out of it, I'll update you guys here. Until then, I'll be seeing you. Following the ordeal, it seems like everything in my life has been watched. By doctors, by police, and even some government agent types that I've never heard of. I spent some time in an evaluation ward due to my findings, and I don't want to look back on the events of that night anymore. But now, years later, I'm ready to talk about what happened that night. I apologize for making you wait, so allow me to get into it. Looking back on it, I should have known one weekend wouldn't be enough time to confront that thing. The whole ordeal lasted just over 3 weeks. Luckily for my family's sake, the beast itself was taken care of before they got back. The involvement of others in my life and understanding the thing, however, was not, and I imagine it still isn't. That night, that horrid night, I prepared some supplies as a precaution. A first aid kit, rope, spare ammunition for my great-grandfather's shotgun, water, and anything else that I could imagine needing. I crept downstairs, hearing those excruciating groans as always. I made my way up to the door as I always did, quietly and sparing no caution. I pressed my ear to the door, but this time it knew. It felt me on the other side. However, it was not enraged. It seemed just as curious as I was. I should have known that it was tricking me. I devised a plan to remotely open the door using a length of rope and some other supplies. This was so that when the door became unlocked and the thing was set free, I would already be up the stairs. After setting everything up, I was ready. It was 12:30 a.m. I was on the brink of obtaining the knowledge that I had wished to gain for over 15 years. I sat for a while, afraid, but when it all came down to it, my mind had been made up. So I pulled the rope and unleashed the thing. At first it seemed as though it had no intention of leaving, but soon I heard heavy steps and a slick, sliding noise. I could hear it breathing, sniffing its surroundings, and then it picked up on something. It picked up on me. The thing howled in rage and did stomping approach the stairs at a pace that I can only describe as impossible. I didn't bother waiting to see the thing then. I ran up the stairs and out into the grand living room, where I hoped to have enough space to take the thing out. Its steps followed mine by less than a second. I dared not look back. As I got into the living room, I whipped around to shoot at the beast. I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. This thing wasn't human or even anything earthly at all. This was some creature sent from below, crawling on 2 dominant arms followed by a long tail. I can't imagine it being any less than 12 feet long as a whole. Its face, not something describable. No words can be strung together to accurately explain the horror that was its face, nor could one believe that there was any God that would allow this thing to exist. I was so frozen with fear that I didn't even raise the gun. By the time that I even could have, the beast was already on me. It swatted me, burying deep claw marks into my side and slinging me an impossible distance. Had it not been for the adrenaline, I would have been entirely crippled for some time, but my entire body was firing in an effort to survive. As soon as I hit the ground, I was already up, shotgun back in hand, and running faster than I ever had. Before I ran, though, I got a very lousy shot in on the thing. The same shot that would have killed nearly anything, but it only angered the beast and it bruised my shoulder. Regardless, though, it gave me time to run faster than I knew that I was capable of. I ran out the door, dashed off the porch, and went out to the shed to hide and call the authorities. I knew that it would be soon to follow, and I knew that it would be more than capable of breaching the shed. I hoped that it wouldn't immediately know that's where I went, though. It would give me just enough time to call the cops or anybody that could help. When I got to the shed and slammed the door behind me, I could hear it already leaving the house on the hunt for me, but I quickly tore my phone from my pocket and I called 911. They seemed like they thought that I was joking, but I didn't care. Now that I had called, they had to send someone. Now this was a waiting game of survival. Like I've said, I live in the middle of nowhere, so I knew they would take some time to get there, but I believed I could evade the thing until they arrived. I was only barely right. As I had expected, it quickly came barreling out of the door leading from outside into that massive living room. It didn't know where I went at first, it seemed. It paced around, sniffing and making a low, gravelly gurgle. Sooner than I had hoped, though, it picked up my scent with the same impossible speed from before. I heard its powerful stomps lead their way to the wooden shack that I had made my hideaway. It slowed once it had reached the shed, sniffing around and making all kinds of horrible noises. My grandfather had built this shed when I was young. He used it for all sorts of projects, from fixing old cars to replacing parts on our lawnmower. It's also where my love for auto mechanics began. The little timber and plywood shed had made a part of who I am, so watching that beast tear through a wall as if it were as flimsy as paper made my stomach churn. As the thing tore through the wall, it sent splinters of wood and many of the tools laying about all over the place. A pair of pliers laying on what used to be a workbench behind the wall that was now a hole flew at me like a bullet, barely missing and leaving me with a small gash in my shoulder. Luckily, the thing's impact staggered it to an extent. I jumped out from behind my flimsy cover, already starting to sprint for a new way to evade the beast. The cornfield. It was perfect. I could remain out of sight of the thing and still be able to fire at it. I sprinted towards the tall plants as fast as my legs could carry me, and the beast was not far behind now that it had recuperated. Once I was in the field, I hung a hard right, hoping that the thing might think that I continued straight. To my surprise, it worked. Less than 2 seconds behind me, it entered the field and rushed forward about 30 feet. Because of its size, I was able to get a good approximation for its location in the tall cornfield because of the sound and dispersed foliage. I shot twice as quickly as I could with the shotgun. Its shrill cry rang through the night air. I knew that I had hurt it pretty bad, but by some wonder it only seemed to grow angrier and more desperate to finish me off. It darted towards me at an even more unthinkable pace, leaping towards me and slashing with its muscular, taloned arms. It cut across my ribs, tearing my shirt and leaving deep gashes in my chest. The pain was staggering. It was like something that I had never experienced. 3 lines across my chest, about 5 inches long and almost an inch deep. Despite my pain, I knew that I had to do something to survive, and quickly. Already running from my vicious foe, I had to make a plan to get enough time to wrap something around my ribs. At this rate of blood loss, I knew that I had only a little bit of time before I wouldn't be able to run, or for that matter, even survive. I did the only thing I thought I could do to distract it: the coop. We had 18 hens, all egg-laying. They provided many breakfasts for me and my family, and even some extra cash from the neighbors when I was young. I ran to it, desperately hoping that the hens would be enough to throw the beast off my trail long enough for me to clean myself up. When I made it to the coop, I went through the front door and ran out the back frame made for the chickens. Despite being made for chickens, it was roughly a 3-foot by 3-foot square hole, so I only had to briefly crouch to continue running. As I ran out the other side, the beast barreled through the front door frame, tearing off some shrapnel from the sides of the frame. As expected, he noticed the chickens and immediately went for them. From what I heard behind me as I ran, I imagined it swept them up one by one with its powerful arms, only to consume them whole in 1 or 2 vicious bites. The hen's sacrifice wouldn't go unforgotten. They gave me enough time to run to the barn to bandage myself and ready my next plan of action. As I made my way into the large barn, I immediately cut a piece from my pants and bandaged my wounded chest. It had maybe been a minute and a half since I was wounded, but I was already feeling weaker than before. I wrapped my chest tight and many times over so that no more blood would escape my body. As I finished, I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was already nearing 1:30. I couldn't tell you how, but being in this thing's presence genuinely sped time up. To this day, I have no explanation for how something like that could work, though. Luckily for me, that meant the cops would arrive soon, and if I was even luckier, there would be more than 1 cop car. For now, though, I had to prepare the next part of my impromptu plan. The shotgun obviously only angered the thing, so I left it in the barn, half loaded. I ran to the wall of tools on the backside of the barn and grabbed a hay fork. If bullets didn't work, maybe I could drive something through the heart of this beast. I had heard many stories of iron being a repellent or a weapon against the supernatural. I had to take my chances and hope that this would work. As I grabbed the fork, I heard the thing taking a deep and haggardly sniff. It was done with the chickens, and now wanted its primary target, me. Before it could reach me, I had to find a vantage point from which to pierce it safely. Immediately I went for the loft. Regardless of how it came up, I could stab it in its transition from ground to the loft. I heard it run from the coop to the barn as soon as it caught my scent. It bursted through the giant barn door, following my exact trail to the back wall and then around. It looked up the ladder and then around the edge of the loft, and then it saw me. It snarled and let out a screechy, chittering, growling noise. It propelled itself straight up from the ground to the loft, surprisingly not smashing through the wood, with its massive arms and a slight flick from its long tail. Seeing as I had a weapon between me and it, the beast circled me like a cat. It flicked its tail at me, making me realize that even its tail was weaponized. It had a spike at the end of it with a line of serration on the top side. I plunged the fork forward instinctively, and I got one of the outer prongs to leave a relatively deep scratch on its tail. In turn, its attack was barely deflected and swept past my right thigh, leaving me with yet another gash, though not quite as deep. The laceration burned awfully. When I looked up, however, it seemed my foe was in an equal amount of pain. The cut on its tail had singed up and was giving off slight smoke. I had gambled right. The iron fork had an effect on the beast. I threw the fork down from the loft and jumped soon after it and rolled as I hit the ground. Don't get me wrong, this did not feel great. It was a solid 10 feet to the loft, but the alternative of trying to get to the ladder was likely a death sentence. I rushed out of the barn and back towards the house, the beast still pursuing closely. And that's when I heard it. Sirens. 2 police cruisers had arrived, both with 2 officers per car. I rushed into the house to try and evade the beast and give me time to explain the situation to the officers. As I bobbed and weaved among the farmhouse's many doors and intricacies my grandfather had made, I felt myself getting weaker and almost drowsy. "Did that stinger pack venom?" I muttered under shaky breaths. "Not now!" I yelled to myself as I rushed through the house with the beast only 10 feet behind me. Then I had an idea. In the kitchen there was a gap in the wall that saw into the living room. If I could duck down behind that window after jumping through, the thing might think that I continued forward. Despite it being a huge gamble with my life, it was gaining on me quickly and I had to make a choice. I ran to the kitchen, the beast's violent stomps only a foot or so behind me at this point. As I reached the counter with the window over it, I quickly vaulted the counter and made a sharp turn to the right around the wall and then ducked down. Not a second later, the beast barreled through the gap, tearing away some of the frame, and bore a hard right and rushed down the hallway. I used this opportunity and quietly, yet hurriedly, exited the house. I could hear it still clattering around inside. My scent was engraved inside the house, so tracking me by scent out of it would be a near impossible task. As I came out of the house, hayfork still in hand, I rushed to meet the officers. As I approached, they raised their weapons. "No, no, no," I said. "I live here and there's some kind of monster inside." "I'm sorry, what?" the officer closest to me said bluntly. A shrill cry retched from inside the house, scaring all the officers and painting the scared look on their faces. "Bullets won't do anything to it. You need something iron," I told them with urgency. Even if I believed this crap, I wouldn't choose some iron too. But just then, the beast leapt through a window on the 2nd floor, tearing a hole in the wall around it. Once they saw the nightmare, they immediately raised their weapons to shoot and began firing. The shots rang out in my ears, but the shrill, angry cry of the beast fought the sound in the air. The beast charged towards us, angrier than ever. As the cops continued firing, I raised my fork to defend myself. Much to my surprise, the beast entirely dodged me and went for the cop on my left. It slung itself at the officer with great speed and tackled him to the ground, quickly swiping at his face and plunging its tail through his body armor and into his chest. He was gone in an instant. While it was still tearing into what was left of him, I took another jab at the beast. It stuck through its side and ran deep into what I imagined was its stomach region. The beast howled in pain and snapped his head in my direction. The cop behind me quickly swooped in to aid with a crowbar. The back end of the crowbar ran into its skull, staggering the beast back and onto its side. "Thank you," I said. "You saved my life." "Not yet, I haven't," the man said gruffly, pointing towards the thing. The beast stood up, a gash in the side of his face showing bone, and 4 pronged stab wounds in its side. Now we were making progress. The other 2 remaining cops dug through the police cruisers for anything iron, while the other officer and I threatened and prodded at the beast to keep it off of us. One officer found a wrench and the other a piece of rebar with a jagged end. "Backup's on the way," the officer with the wrench said. "Good," I replied. We moved our way in on the beast. Now we were on the attacker, so I thought. The beast stood on guard, ready to fend back any attack that we may send its way with its tail. Instinctively, the officers began to surround it. I followed suit. As we pushed closer in a circular formation, we prepared to attack. Suddenly, the beast swept its tail in a circle and swiped us off our feet one by one, and then rammed its tail through the leg of the officer with the wrench. However, this time, the serration wouldn't allow the beast to rip its spear-ended tail out of the men's leg, so instead, it just took the officer with it. It slung the officer to and fro against the ground. The officer's screams were something that I'll never forget, and then suddenly a loud crack and the screaming had stopped. The officer's head was barely held onto his neck and the beast had freed its tail from the officer's leg. While I was on my back, dreary weakness and exhaustion tried to pull me into sleep. I was so tired, I knew that I was worn out, but with this adrenaline I should be the furthest thing from sleepy. I looked down at the gash in my leg as I stood up. "God, no," I muttered. The officer with the crowbar noticed this and said, "What's that?" pointing to my wound. "Its tail has some kind of venom in it." I told him with fear. "It's a sedative, I think." "Well, that's not good," the same officer yelled as the beast made way for the other officer with the rebar. The officer with the rebar was already up and running for his life. It was an effort in vain. The beast quickly caught up and tore through his chest, and as it did, the officer jammed the rebar through the beast's torso, missing its heart by what had to be only inches and stabbing through a lung. It wheezed deeply, chittering noises released as it exhaled. It was going to die now either way, and it knew that, and even worse, it was mad about it. With the rebar still lodged in its chest, it finished tearing into the officer's body. I shivered to think what was going through his head in his last moments, and now it was just me and the officer with the crowbar left. Luckily, the beast was slowly suffocating, but that wouldn't be enough for us both to survive. The beast shrieked out in a mixture of pain and rage. I held my pitchfork high, expecting a rampant attack. The officer held out the crowbar in a batter's stance. Neither of us knew what would happen next, but we both were praying to God that we would make it out. "My name's Davy," the officer said in a whimper. "Zander," I shouted back. "Zander, if I don't make it, ask the folks at the office to tell my wife I love her." The beast turned to face us and promptly reared back. "I won't have to. We're both going to make it," I shouted back. "Take this." I tossed the pitchfork to him, and he dropped the crowbar and caught the fork in one clean motion. "I'm going to run and grab its attention. Once it's following me, I want you to charge it and stab it right in the heart. You ready?" I said. "What? No, wait," was all that he managed to get out before I booked it. The beast quickly followed and was soon to pass him, and then it hit me. My vision blurred, my head spun, and within an instant I had passed out. When I awoke, I was in a hospital room surrounded by agents ready to ask questions. It wasn't until Officer Davy came into the room and cleared them out that I got some room to think. "What happened?" I asked him. "I did what you told me to," Davy said bluntly. "And it worked," I said, shocked. "Well, yeah," said the thing, squirming like a poked pig, and then he fell over and faded out. "You knew your plan would work, right?" "Well, yeah, of course," I said, lying through my teeth. Apparently those agents had collected the body of the thing and shipped it off for testing. They've periodically reached out to pester me with more questions since it happened. The more they do, the less I've told them. They made me sign an NDA when it first happened, but who cares? My family knows a different telling of the story which I didn't like. But it kept them off my back about it, so I went with it. For the most part, that's where the story ends. But I swear to this day I hear those same chittering breaths before I fall asleep.